So that's why we can have a panic attack if nobody steps in to stop this process and negative spiral. So to slow down the stress system, the brain has several brakes. 3 brakes to be specific. One of these is a part of the brain known as the hippocampus. The hippocampus is important for memories and also navigation, but most importantly, it's one of the major stress brakes. The hippocampus essentially counterbalances the stress. It's always trying to break and slow down the stress system, and this happens continually in our brains, not just when we're stressed. So there's always a balance between the amygdala and the hippocampus where they're pulling in different directions. The amygdala is revving the gas of stress, and the hippocampus is braking and pulling back. One thing that's good to know is that the stress hormone cortisol essentially acts like a toxin to the hippocampus, and so it can kill its cells and make it shrink over time. If it's too much cortisol under too long time, like months and years, then the hippocampus can actually shrink, and this is what we usually call burnout. You might have difficulty finding words or finding places. But worse than this is that when the hippocampus shrinks from being exposed to high cortisol levels for a long time, it also becomes a weaker brake. So just like the brakes on a bicycle that you use a lot, they can get worn out over time. When they examined the brain of people that have had a lot of problems with stress and anxiety, they actually saw that the hippocampus was smaller relative to other humans. Dr. Hansen explains that it's because the exposure to cortisol over a long time has killed off the hippocampus and made it shrink. He says that training and motion is like Christmas for the hippocampus, and that there doesn't seem to be anything whatsoever that is so beneficial for the hippocampus as training and being physically active. He says that if we train regularly, the hippocampus can actually make new brain cells. So essentially, the hippocampus works as a brake to the stress system, and a brake that gets stronger when we train and are physically active. Now, the second brake that we have against stress sits behind our forehead. It's the frontal lobe and the prefrontal cortex. When it comes to stress, the frontal lobe has as a function not to let us overreact emotionally and irrationally. And just like with the hippocampus, it's a constant tug of war between the amygdala and the frontal lobe. And again, not just when something stressful is happening, but all the time. And the end result of this tug of war is a type of balance, and that balance differentiates between person to person. So someone that might be more inclined towards nervousness and anxiety might have a balance skewed more towards the amygdala. So essentially, if someone is always seeing dangers all around and getting scared of their own shadow, what is essentially happening is that the amygdala is having an upper hand on the frontal lobe and signaling danger where there is none. And on the contrary, if someone seems very composed and always, calm, you're gonna have a balance that's skewed towards more to the frontal lobe, where it has more control over the amygdala. And again, just like with the hippocampus, if the frontal lobes are exposed to cortisol under a too long time, they also shrink and lessen in their size. People that have a lot of worry in their personality actually turn out to have a smaller frontal lobe in size. So if we want to get a grip on the anxiety in our lives, it's very important that we're able to strengthen our frontal lobes. As it turns out, the frontal lobes and the hippocampus are the two parts of the brain that get strengthened the most of exercise. And if you train long term, we've actually seen that you get new blood vessels in your frontal lobes. Not only that, but the frontal lobes actually grows bigger if you're physically active over an extended period of time, like months. What's more is that the nerves that connect the frontal lobes to the amygdala grow stronger over time, like a highway getting more lanes, and this increases the control that the frontal lobes has on the amygdala. So again, while some of these effects you get immediately after the training session, some of them you have to wait months and be consistent with. When they examined people with GAD, so general anxiety disorder, they actually saw that this highway of nerves between the frontal lobes and the amygdala was smaller. So essentially, imagine that you have your police force in one city, and then you have the crimes happening in another city. And if you quickly want to get all your resources from the one city to the second, you gotta have a wide highway with a lot of lanes. Otherwise the criminals, or in this case the anxiety, will just run rampant. And it will take too long for the police or the hippocampus and frontal lobes in this case to come there and do something about it. The third brake that we have on stress is a type of cell that releases a certain amino acid. And this amino acid happens to have a calming effect on the brain that kind of slows down the nervous system and makes everything smooth. And the amino acid that these cells are releasing in the brain is called GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid. As Dr. Hansen describes it, It works as a kind of fire extinguisher on the brain, which makes them calm down their activity. And when the brain activity is calm, then we also feel calm. And this is exactly what alcohol does on the brain. It kind of increases this GABA release from these cells. And the same with pills such as Xanax. That's why Xanax has been called a dry drunk, because it feels like you're drunk without having to drink. And when we drink alcohol or take pills such as Xanax, what we do is that we increase the GABA release from these cells in the brain, which makes us feel calm, of course. And the problem is that it actually works too effective. So you can get addicted to these pills and alcohol for the stress relieving effects. Now, the nice thing here is that the GABA release from these cells in the brain don't only get affected by alcohol and Xanax, but also by, you guessed it, training. You get some extra GABA release if you walk, but you get especially much if you run or cycle, for example. The point is that you're getting a little bit more intensity when you run, and that you kind of raise your heart rate a little bit more. And we're so lucky because today we know that physical activity increases the GABA release in the parts of the brain that are especially affected by stress, so the frontal lobes. And the reason I say that we're lucky is that if you train, you strike at the very core of the stress. And so it's hitting the target of stress precisely where it hurts. And let's be honest, we all want to hurt the stress. As Dr. Hansen describes it, these cells that release the GABA are sometimes known as nanny neurons because they kind of calm down the rest of them. And when they calm down the rest of the cells around them, they make an effect of the whole brain to kind of calm down. And not only are these GABA releasing cells made in the frontal lobes, but also they're made in the hippocampus. So these are the three breaks. We have the hippocampus, we have the frontal lobes, and the GABA releasing cells. What's interesting is that everybody would get anxiety if they're exposed to a life-threatening thing, but only some people get anxiety from smaller things, like stepping on a subway, for example. So if your brain has been worn out by stress for months and years, and you're essentially burned out, and as a result, you get anxiety from even small things like going on a subway or an airplane, what you need to do is to first heal your brain by training, and then after your brain is healed, then you can use exposure therapy to go back to these places where you had a negative experience and to then get confidence that you can handle them. The problem is that a lot of psychologists prescribe KBT before the brain is healed and you're ready to experience that again. So then you just get a new trauma again. Let's say as an example that you were cycling through a bumpy road in the woods with your bicycle. And what happened last time you did that was that your bicycle broke. And now the psychologist is telling you to just go out and do that again, and so you'll get a positive experience this time. But of course, why would you want to do that if you know for a fact or a high probability that your bicycle is going to just break again? And that would make you even more scared of cycling in the woods. So of course, what you have to do is that you first repair the bike, and then you can go out into this bumpy road in the woods to cycle. And then you succeed that, and then you have a positive experience, and then you do this again and again, and you slowly start to associate cycling in the woods with something positive instead. But you can't just get out there with no preparation like the psychologists tell you to do. Okay everybody, thank you for watching that, and I hope you learned something new. In the last part of this 3-part mini-series, I'm gonna share one of my personal stories, and I'm also gonna go into some of the studies. And lastly, if you haven't watched the first episode, be sure to go back and watch that too. See you in the next one.